I particularly welcome Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed, Dr. Vinod Mubai, and those who are going to conduct today's proceedings. Of course, after the demise of our friend and mentor, Dr. Asghar Ali Engineer, we have been trying to continue some of the activities which he initiated. Of course, there are many reasons because of which we are not able to carry on with many of the activities done earlier. But the good thing is also that we have added on to those things in that spirit, like our peace centers, and to cap it all, this Asghar Ali Engineer Memorial Lecture. I'm very happy to say that these memorial lectures, at one hand, remind us of the great contribution of Dr. Engineer, the breadth of his work, the depth of his work, the impact of his work. It does remind us. And it is one of the reasons why we are getting such a good response for these lectures. The other reason, of course, is that most of the speakers we have invited so far have been very accomplished in their area of work, and they have contributed immensely to the process of social thought. And I'm very sure that most of these lectures will be remembered in the intellectual world. And the second expectation, which I always have, is that we will also develop mechanisms, bridges, through which the content of these lectures will be transmitted, passed on to the average people, large, vast sections of society. That is one of my major concerns generally, because it is the mindset, the thinking pattern, the social common sense, which influences the politics in a large way. Anyway, I'm sure we will take steps to ensure that these lectures not only are compiled, edited, published as YouTube videos, but also in the printed form, but also the gist of that comes out in the form which can be very popular at the broad community level. Now, today, I'm very happy to reconnect with Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed, with whom I was in touch for a number of years, exchanging views and ideas on various issues. And it is such a pleasure that to hear him today. He has done immense work on this tragedy of partition, which many of us have not only suffered, many of our families not only have suffered. I'm sure some amongst those who are on the panel and who are in the audience have felt it personally or indirectly. But the tragedy continues in some form or the other. The forces which led to the division of the country have been always dominant in Pakistan, and they are becoming dominant in India. That's a tragic thing. Anyway, I don't want to preempt the scholarly lecture which our friend Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed will give. With this, I happily welcome all of you and give the proceedings to Neha for the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ram. It's my pleasure to now invite Dr. Vinod Mubai, who was a nuclear scientist in the US, who is an author of books. He's he's part of public intellectual, as to say, because he conducts many discussions. He's been very active in sharing his views, and he's been a friend and patron to the center, as well as a very close friend of Dr. Asghar Ali Engineer. And it would be absolutely apt to request him to speak a few words about Dr. Asghar Ali Engineer.
Thank you, Neha, and good evening, friends, some of whom are long-standing friends, and especially at the center with which I've been associated for much of my life. It is a great privilege and honor to say a few words about Asghar Bhai, engineer, who I first met in 1969 when I had come to Bombay to work at atomic energy there. And ever since then, our first meeting, we became not only close friends, but I would say comrades, because we took part in many activities while I lived in Bombay. And then after I went back to US, we continued the association very closely with his trips to US from time to time, and my trips back to Bombay. What I'd like to stress here are a few aspects of his personality. Of course, he became known as a very well-known and famous person, an Islamic scholar and untiring activist who unveiled the truth about communal violence, not only in India, but in most places of South Asia and Southeast Asia as well, and who was regarded very highly for his writings on human rights and so on. What I would like to stress is that Asghar Bhai trained as an engineer, and the good aspects of science and engineering were actually reflected in his work and in his adherence to facts as a basis for reaching conclusions. His opinions were not formed out of some misty or cloudy portion of his mind. It was firmly grounded in facts and reason. And even if he was a believer later in life in religion, a scholar of Islam, yet he maintained a keen interest in what we know as akal or reason in all the views that he formed and that he put out in his public life. Now, there are just two other things that I would like to mention about Asghar Bhai. Firstly, he gained the Right to Livelihood Award, which is also known as the alternate Nobel Prize. And he gained that in the late 1990s, I believe, if I remember correctly, along with his friend, the Swami Agnivesh, who was also awarded the prize. The other aspect of his is that he was a reformer, and within his own community of Daudi Boras, which, reform for him and democratic rights began at home. And for this, as is well known, he was reviled, he was persecuted, he was physically attacked numerous times by the leadership of the community that he belonged to and that he wished to reform and that he wished to bring democratic rights to. So that is something that is also a unique part of his personality. And we were associated for over 45 years very closely. It was a great blow to me when I learned that he had passed. And of course, we all have to pass. There is no eternal life in that sense, but he will always be remembered as a fighter and a rationalist in all aspects of his work, and I pay homage in regard to his memory at this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vinod Mubai, and Dr. Vinod in today's session. So we have Professor Kamla Ganesh, who was formerly the professor of sociology in the Department of Sociology in at the Mumbai University Professor Kamla Ganesh is associated with many progressive causes. She is very passionate about diversity, culture, and she's very instrumental also in the Dr. Asghar Ali Engineer Memorial Activities Committee that we have, which plans and, so to say, is the strength of this entire initiative. So with this, I invite Professor Kamla Ganesh to speak a few words about the Dr. Asghar Ali Engineer Memorial Activities.
Thank you. Thank you, Neha, and good evening, friends. It is my pleasure to be able to say a few words with this institution, which I have been associated now for some years, and I have greatly benefited and enjoyed working with CSSS. Dr. Asghar Ali Engineer, whom I have not met, he is a respected and celebrated personality in the world of academics, activism, and human rights. He was the founder and chairperson of the Center for Study of Society and Secularism, under whose aegis today's event is taking place. As a writer and activist, he was a courageous crusader, braving many attacks, as Vinod Mubai told us, ideological and physical, in his cause of social harmony, secularism, and democracy in the country. His autobiography, A Living Faith, My Quest for Peace and Harmony and Social Change, is a moving testament to his struggles and battles for his chosen cause. Dr. Vinod Mubai, who was both a personal friend of Dr. Engineer and his collaborator in his many ventures, has already highlighted his outstanding contributions. I will only mention here that his vast oeuvre in scholarship and activism spanned 4 important areas. And these areas are what the annual activities of the Asghar Ali Engineer Memorial Committee is based on. And these areas are secularism, theory, concept, and practice, rights of women in the Quran, reforms in the Dawoodi Bohra community, and liberation theology going beyond specific religions in harnessing faith for human emancipation. Taking his legacy further, the Center for the Study of Society and Secularism, along with other organizations Dr. Engineer was associated with, has instituted 3 annual activities. 1, the Dr. Asghar Ali Engineer Memorial Lectures. 2 lectures a year are held and are given by eminent scholars, activists, or public intellectuals around the themes close to Dr. Engineer's heart. Professors Romila Thapar, Prabhat Patnaik, Rajiv Bhargava, Zoya Hassan, Sayyida Hamid, and Harbans Mukhia, among others, have given these lectures in previous years. Today's lecture by Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed is part of this lecture series, and there is no doubt that it will be a fitting continuation of the line of erudite previous speakers. The second activity has to do with the best published paper in journals. An award has been instituted to promote research and scholarship in the areas dear to Dr. Engineer. Over the years, we have been receiving entries of papers from eminent and refereed journals. A distinguished jury selects the final awardee out of the short list sent by the Memorial Committee. And the third activity is an institution of the Asghar Ali Engineer Memorial Lifetime Achievement Award. This is an annual award to honor a distinguished personality for outstanding contribution in promoting harmony between communities. The previous awardees are Professor K.P. Raman Unni for his contribution to literature, Father Stan Swami posthumously for his crusade for tribal rights, and most recently to Professor Abdul Sattar Dalvi for his huge contribution in translation of Marathi and Urdu literary gems to bring the communities closer and foster communal harmony. So now I hand over to Neha to continue the proceedings, I think, with an introduction to the speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Kamla Ganesh. Okay, so I don't think we should keep the lecture. So I will briefly introduce our speaker today, Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, who holds a PhD in political science from Stockholm University. He was member of the faculty in the Department of Political Science at the Stockholm University during 1987 to 2010. He is currently Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the Stockholm University. He is Honorary Senior Fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore, where he worked as Senior Research Professor during 2007 to 2010. We all know Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed also through his very, very insightful writings. So he has published several books with special focus on the politics of South Asia discussed in the context of regional and international relations. His book, The Punjab Bloodied, Partitioned and Cleansed, Unraveling the 1947 Tragedy through Secret British Reports and First-Person Account, which was published by the Oxford University Press, won him the Best Non-Fictional Book Award at the Karachi Literature Festival 2013 and the Lahore Literary Festival 2013. Its Indian edition was published by Rupa Books 2011, Urdu in 2015, Hindi in 2018, and Gurmukhi Punjabi edition of the books have also been published. His latest book, Jinnah, His Successes, Failures, and Role in History, which was published by Penguin New Delhi to 2020, has won the Best English Non-Fiction Book Award at the Valley of Words Festival, Dehradun 2021. He has contributed extensively to peer-reviewed journals and chapters to edited books. His research interests cover as diverse fields as political Islam, ethnicity and nationalism, human, minority and group rights, partition studies, and the Punjabi contribution to cinema. He writes columns in several Pakistani newspapers. He is also the editor-in-chief of the Liberal Arts and Social Sciences International Journal. He's a member of the editorial advisory board of the Asian Ethnicity, Journal of Punjab Studies, IPRI Journal Islamabad, and PIP's Research Journal of Conflict and Peace Studies, Islamabad. Currently, he's working on the new book, The Partitions of India, in introduction, because there is a sea of scholarship that Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed has contributed to. I invite him to deliver this 20th Dr. Asghar Ali Engineer Memorial Lecture. Professor, please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Neha ji, for this very generous introduction. I'm greatly honored to be invited by the Center for the Study of Society and Secularism to deliver this year the Asghar Ali Engineer Memorial Lecture, today on the 3rd of December, 2022. I had the privilege of knowing Dr. Engineer personally, having met him at a number of conferences, and once I visited the CSSS Center in Mumbai in 1997. On that occasion, I met also Irfan. Dr. Asghar Ali Engineer, as we have heard, many of the colleagues already mentioned this, was an indefatigable champion of the best values humankind have devised to give each individual and multifarious cultural groups a sense of security and dignity. Secularism, humanism, pluralism, and democracy. These values he defended both as a leading scholar as well as through his fearless activism in practical life. His seminal writings continue to inspire his colleagues and admirers and learners all over the world. On the 75th anniversary of the partition of India, which left India divided and bleeding, to create the independent dominions of India and Pakistan, the deep scars it inflicted on the psyche of the peoples of India and Pakistan and the behavior of their governments needs to be put into perspective. Every day at dusk, animosity between India and Pakistan is elaborately and ostentatiously manifested during the flag lowering ceremony at the Wagah Atari border in Punjab. In Punjab, situated between Lahore on the Pakistani side and Amritsar on the Indian side. Before partition, when Punjab was united, many people had daily caught the early bus or train from one of these cities, did their job or business in the other, and returned home by dusk. The distance between the two cities is about 30 miles or 48 kilometers. The cities were closely integrated economically and were expanding towards one another and were expected to merge in the future. Such processes were ruptured abruptly and surgically, erasing in the popular mind a shared history going hundreds of years back. Consequently, the daily spectacle of the flag lowering ceremony at the Wagah Atari border with Indian and Pakistani soldiers ramming the iron gates with a fierce bang, while large crowds on both sides add zest to the ceremony by nervous clapping and other awkward gesticulations, presents a grotesque spectacle, indicating that an impassable barrier exists between the two countries and the people. The underlying logic upon which the partition rested was an argument that if you do not belong to my faith, then you are my enemy. And therefore, the only way to keep mortal enemies from attacking and destroying one another was to separate them. Separating them would entail a division of territory on which they lived so that they were granted separate states. Such reasoning by no means was rooted in historical experience of the people of the region. On the contrary, the subcontinent represented a legacy going far back several millennia of both peaceful migrations as well as invasions from other parts of the world, most notably from regions beyond the mountain passes in northwestern zones of the subcontinent. Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, and myriads of cults and sects constituted a mosaic of beliefs, customs, and traditions prior to the arrival of Islam in the 7th century. In the centuries that followed, Muslim rule, founded by waves of invaders, found adherents from among the local people, adding further cultural variation to the social fabric. While attempts to expand the Muslim empire to all nooks and corners of India were made, especially during the Mughal period, by both Emperor Akbar and Aurangzeb, there is no evidence that the Muslim ruler sought to create a separate Muslim state by breaking up India. Later on, Sikhism and Christianity were to gain followers. The growth of Sikh power in the northwest, Maratha power in southwestern India, and finally the British triumphing over all others created apprehensions and fears, as well as generated new ambitions among Indian people. The age-old tradition of state and government prevalent in the region was based on the fiction of the ruler being a protector of all communities. A change of ruler and the violence and disruption it caused did not necessitate new state formations. The new ruler picked up the pieces and continued to rule mixed populations even when he privileged his own religion or sect. Frontiers did exist, which expanded and contracted, but the populations largely stayed put. The idea of a partition of India, which gained momentum rapidly after March 1947 and resulted in the gory breakup of colonial India, was therefore a phenomenon which originated in the era of mass politics of the 20th century. Ironically, it was the new ideas of responsible government, representation, election, and the right to vote and contest public office, nation and nationalism, and the right of self-determination, which produced intended and unintended consequences, which in the end culminated in the partition of India and the two Muslim majority provinces of Punjab and Bengal. Now, ideas of partitioning India between Hindus and Muslims had started being expressed from the second half of the 19th century. Sir Syed among Muslims was a leader or a champion of the two-nation theory. At about the same time, in 1858, Taran Charan Chattopadhyay wrote his Bharat Varshar Itihas, the first virtual anti-Muslim manifesto. He wrote, everything wrong in India was attributed to the 1,000 years of Muslim domination. The book explained, the misfortunes and decline of this country began on the day the Yavana, the Muslim flag, entered the territory of Bengal, ravaged by endless waves of oppression. The people of Bengal became disabled and timid. And so he continued. In 1888, Muharram Ali Chishti of Lahore proposed that India be divided to create an Islamic state in northwestern India. In 1917, the Carey brothers of Delhi came to Stockholm to attend the meeting of the First International, where they proposed also the partition of India to create a socialist Islamic state. In 1918, the Aga Khan came up with the novel idea of an Anglo-Muhammadan empire, which created great fears among the Hindus. So among the apprehensive Hindus, especially of Punjab, where they were a minority but more educated, economically more developed, the Arya Samaj movement gained many adherents. Bhai Parmanand in 1912 proposed the partition of India so that the Muslims are either driven west of the Indus, or as some other Hindu scholars or ideologues such as Munje said, that they should be reconverted to Hinduism. Savarkar in 1923 proposed Hindutva. Lala Lajpat Rai in 1924, after the Kohat riots in which Hindus and Sikhs were attacked mercilessly by the Muslim tribes of that area, on the publication of a pamphlet considered insulting to the Prophet of Islam. He also, who was originally in favor of Hindu-Muslim unity and had actually become a follower of Sir Sayyid, his father had, and joined the Naqshbandi Sufi order. He reverted to Hinduism. Again in 1937, Hindutva was forcefully put forward by Savarkar, saying that it is infantilism of some Hindu leaders to believe that Hindus and Muslims can form one nation. This was followed by Gawalkar in 1938, making the notorious statement that we should learn, the old nation of India should learn from the Germans what they have done to the Jews. Non-Hindus have no rights in India, not even the rights of secondary citizens. So these ideas were there on both sides, and one can go on and on and on. Just to show how this was being ventilated among Muslims, I give you two examples before we look at the dynamics of the partition. In 1930, Sir Muhammad Iqbal set forth the idea of a separate Muslim state to be created in the Muslim majority zones of Northwest India. He based his argument on a novel two-nation theory, according to which India consisted of two separate and distinct nations. Now, this was novel only in the sense that he was actually demarcating the type of borders this new state will have. Later on, when he was challenged by the British that was he supporting pan-Islamism, he wrote a letter saying that, no, not at all, the Muslims can't think of opting out of the British Empire. Rather, they would be the frontline state to meet any threats from the Northwest within the British Empire. But the main Muslim ideologue of complete separation from the rest of India was a mysterious figure, Chaudhry Rahmat Ali. In 1933, he wrote a pamphlet, Now or Never, at Cambridge, in which he presented the idea of a separate Muslim state, Pakistan, P for Punjab, A for Afghania, K for Kashmir, and Istan for Sindh and Balochistan. The kernel of his litany was that Hindus and Muslims were two different nations with entirely irreconcilable worldviews, sense of history and destiny. Under no circumstance could they live together in peace in one country. Standing as a wall against all these divisive communalist ideas was the Indian National Congress. Founded in 1885, it became the vehicle for ventilating Indian concerns. We all know initially it was a loyalist organization, but from the 1920s, it radicalized and became a mass party under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi. And a number of British policies provoked Indian people to start protesting their rule. One was the Rowlatt Acts of 1919, which, after the Indians had supported the war effort during the First World War with both donations and 2.5 million volunteers joining the Indian Army, of which more than 1 million came from Punjab, instead of offering some sort of self-rule, the British clamped the Rowlatt Acts, which gave arbitrary powers to the government to arrest people merely on the suspicion that they were planning to overthrow the British government in India. There was no evidence to support such a drastic decision. The only cases of any armed resistance was during the partition of Bengal, when the Bhadralok resorted to terrorism and some British officers were attacked, including the Viceroy, I think. And then in 1913-14, the Ghadar party stirred up the Punjab countryside, but both were crushed mercilessly. So after this, then you have further radicalization through the Jallianwala Bagh, and then comes the Khilafat question, which for the Muslims of India was an important concern. They saw that the Europeans had taken away power in North Africa, in other parts of Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East. And the only symbol of Muslim power which remained was the Ottoman Empire. But after the Ottomans were defeated in the First World War, the British went back on their, oblique suggestions that we won't take away the holy sites of Islam from the Ottomans. They went on and dismembered the Ottoman Empire even in the Middle East. And as a reaction, many radical anti-imperialist Muslims joined that. They went to Mahatma Gandhi, and Gandhi ji, I think in good faith and with the best of intentions, decided to lead them. Because had he refused to support this popular demand of the Muslims, he would then have had to live with the allegation, which nevertheless is still made against him, that he was a communal Hindu. Anyhow, he did help, and that gave to the Hindus and Muslims of northwestern India, Sindh, Punjab, I have ample evidence showing that the question of pollution and all was forgotten, and Hindus and Muslims associated with one another as brothers. Of course, we have the Mopla uprising, which is not for me to take up on this occasion. But we now move to the processes which set into motion towards partition. I think 1935 Act, which expanded the right to vote, but only to 10–11% of the population, followed by the election of 1937, was a turning point. And the turning point was that whereas the Indian National Congress won handsomely in the Hindu majority provinces, as well as in the province with the largest concentration of Muslims, that is the Northwest Frontier province, with the Khudai Khidmatgar, and the Muslim League was routed in the Muslim majority provinces. In Punjab, where 75 seats were reserved for Muslims, after 1909, Muslims voted separately for Muslim candidates. This was a masterstroke of the British to separate Muslims from the rest of the people of India. And in 1917, the same had been granted to the Sikhs in Punjab, where the Muslim majority was then checked, put into, was balanced by the Sikhs getting more representation than the numbers. This is how the British managed representation and yet dividing people as they went along. So in 1937, the Muslim League was routed. In Punjab, out of 75 seats, I think they won 2, which became 1. In Sindh, not a single seat, where Muslims were 70%, 29% were Hindus. And in the Northwest Frontier province, where Muslims were 94%, not a single seat. In Bengal, which was a Muslim majority province, out of 114 reserved seats, they got 40. The rest were won by the Krishak Praja Party and other regional parties. On that occasion, I think the Congress made a decision that the Muslim League did not represent the aspiration of the Muslim people. And in the UP, it was laid down that if Muslims wanted to join the ministry, they had to resign from the Muslim League, join the Congress before they could be considered. At that point, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who since about 30 years had been once a champion of Indian nationalism, then for a long time he had been campaigning for the rights of Muslims and other nationalities within a decentralized India, with very little powers to the center and most powers vested in the provinces. As against this, the Congress had come up with a very workable formula, the Motilal Nehru report, which said that India will be a secular state. There will be no state religion. Men and women will have equal rights. The national language of India will be Hindustani with 2 scripts, Devanagari and Persian Urdu. And in 1931, at Karachi, fundamental rights had been announced for all citizens. But when that was done, there was a reaction among the conservative sections of society. And in 1931 as well, a resolution was passed by the Congress party saying that minorities would still be able to retain their personal law. We know that this personal law issue then has now come to become a major plank for the Hindu right to damn Nehru and secularism and the whole idea of an inclusive constitution which stands in the way of their ideas of the Hindu Rashtra. Anyhow, these things happened at a great pace. Uh, so Muhammad Ali Jinnah met the governor of Bombay and told him that henceforth he is going to use communalism to generate fear among the Muslims that in a united India, Islam will be annihilated and Muslims will be obliterated. And this strategy then was put into two reports known as the Pirpur and Sharif reports, allegedly showing excesses of the Congress governments in its provinces over 2 years. I have demonstrated that these reports were baseless. Jinnah's main patron, Viceroy Linlithgow, was on record saying that I'll tell Jinnah that I've seen the reports and there is no substance in your allegations. And the 3-4 British governors who were rabidly against the Congress coming to power in their provinces, even they had to admit that there was no proof of the Congress targeting Muslims. But this propaganda caught up. And Jinnah, with the help of the British, after the Second World War broke out, these things we know so well, so I'll quickly mention that whereas the Congress said that they will not support the war effort, they are themselves an enslaved people, and unless power is transferred to them and they make the decision as a free people to fight fascism, they can't support the war effort. And I think this was intellectually a very sound argument, but in the politics and the balance of power situation, where the British were desperate to hold on to India, this was an invitation then for Jinnah to make capital out of it. He met Linlithgow and told him, now you have to realize the importance of the Muslim community and the All India Muslim League. We support the war effort, and you promise that at the end of the war, the right of self-determination will be granted to Muslims. This idea was then given formal recognition on the 23rd, 24th of March 1940 at Lahore. The Lahore Resolution was passed. A week later, the Sikhs of Punjab, Sardar Sundar Singh Majithia, came out and said that if the Muslims do not accept India as their homeland, then we will insist that those parts of Punjab which have a Hindu Sikh majority are separated from an Islamic Pakistan and either given to a Sikh state or to India. And so that was how this partition argument started getting momentum. Jinnah is on record after the Lahore Resolution giving a press conference and saying, look, the Lahore Resolution is nothing but a demand for the division of India because Hindus and Muslims have, he borrowed all those ideas which Chaudhry Rahmat Ali had been propagating, that there is nothing common, the heroes of one are the villains of the others, they don't eat together, they don't marry, they don't drink water out of the same vessel. How can you assume that these people will live in peace if they lived in one state? And I think for the British, promoting Jinnah to keep the Congress at bay became the politics of maintaining some sort of effective control over India. The Congress committed, I would say, another blunder when, because of the influence of Subhash Chandra Bose, people in Bengal and parts of Bihar and even Maharashtra had been radicalized. And he had wanted an armed revolution to be staged against the British, which Mahatma Gandhi in 1938 could avoid. But then Bose had gone to Germany and then Japan, and Japan was advancing during the war. In such circumstances, it became impossible for Gandhiji and the Congress leadership not to challenge the British, and the Quit India movement came out. Unfortunately, this was a major miscalculation because Linlithgow could effectively use the state which they had created and which was filled with our own people who had no hesitation in arresting people, whipping them, hanging them, and other atrocities were committed to the people. And so the main party which wanted India united and which was open to all communities was finally removed from the political scene. They were sent to jail, and for 3 years, until June 1945, they were sitting, they were castrated. And in these 3 years, Jinnah Sahab helped the British recruit soldiers not only from Punjab, but all over the Indian subcontinent, mostly Muslims, as well as the Sikhs were willing to extend a helping hand. The Communist Party of India, ironically, also joined this people who were against the Quit India movement. So it was a movement, popular, had uprisings, but was easily crushed because of all other major actors siding with the British. In 1945, when finally the Congress was released, the Pakistan story had been sold by Jinnah to the Muslims through relentless campaigning. I've given all those speeches and all sort of threats and the type of fears he instilled among the Muslims that all harm will happen unless we get Pakistan. Of course, people ask me, this might have appealed to the Muslims of the Muslim majority provinces. How come people in the Hindu majority provinces also voted for the Muslim League in the 1945-46 election? And I have no good explanation at all, except that this was a vote confined to the elite. And maybe the elite Muslims felt strongly that they had to support an Islamic cause. Because, you know, in Punjab, when the Muslim League was campaigning for Pakistan, the Muslims were told that those who do not vote for the Muslim League, they would be refused an Islamic burial if they were to die. And their marriages, their nikah will be annulled. Voting for Pakistan was voting for the Prophet Muhammad, and voting for the Punjab Unionist Party, which was an intercommunal party supported by Congress, some Muslim leaders and the Sikhs, voting for them would be voting for Baldev Singh and so on and so forth. And I think this idea caught up in the other parts of the subcontinent as well. And we have then the Shimla conference failing because Jinnah refused to let the Congress party nominate any Muslim. And the situation only worsened over time. Finally, in 1945, Lord Wavell, the second last viceroy, he prepared what is known as the demarcation plan on the 7th of February 1947, in which he divided the Punjab and Bengal, and that was kept a top secret and sent to the British government. Wavell pleaded with them that it be declared as an award, so everybody accepts. But the British government overruled that, and they let they made another attempt to make the conflicting parties agree to a power sharing deal based on the Muslim League's idea of a weak center, most powers vested in the provinces, called the Cabinet Mission Plan. I've gone through the Cabinet Mission Plan, and a lot of controversies made about it, that look, Jinnah did accept the Congress, the Cabinet Mission Plan. It's the Congress which refused it. But if you look at its main features, it said that every 10 years, the three groups they had formed, Group A, Hindu majority provinces, B and C, Muslim majority provinces, every 10 years, if they wanted, the whole group could leave the union or individual provinces. They also made the hundreds of princely states only surrender foreign affairs and military and defense, and the rest were left to the rulers, which meant that India under Jawaharlal Nehru, with his idea of universal adult franchise, modernization, development, such a government would be unworkable from the day it started. So the Cabinet Mission Plan was basically an attempt of the British to retain control over India through all these tactics. And I have shown that when it came to the British Army, they strongly emphasized that such an India should be treaty bound to Britain for defensive purposes. At about this time, then, within the British military, a memorandum was prepared on the 11th of May 1946, in which the Supreme Commander of the armed forces in the subcontinent, Claude Auchinleck, looked at Pakistan for and against, and concluded that we should not partition India, because if we were to do that, it would mean that we will have to divide the British Indian Army, which was their prize creation to defend the subcontinent from Stalin's communism. So that would entail a breakup of that institution. Also, while Pakistan may be pro-West, India under Nehru may seek relations with the Soviet Union, and they could not afford such a division of the subcontinent. But when Auchinleck wrote this, I have noted his immediate subordinate, General Mayne, wrote, "I do not agree." So already among the British Army, the idea that a partitioned India was the best bet for them to have a foothold in India, rather than give the anti-imperialist Nehru and people around him the chance to assert an independent foreign policy, was already being discussed. 1 year, one day later, 12th of May 1947, I quote a memorandum where they say, now if the partition takes place, we should demand from Pakistan access to Karachi port facilities, to Pakistan airfields, and Muslim manpower, which means the Pakistan Army, whereas Hindustan may go its own way. So it is at that point that the partition of India finally was agreed among those who were sitting in London and their representatives in India, that if you wanted to contain the spread of Soviet communism, actually I've quoted, and if you only permit, I know the time is running short, but Sir Francis Tucker, the head of the Eastern Command, he's on record saying that we need to create an Islamic arc beginning in Algeria, into Arabia Deserta, into Persia and northern Hindustan, armed with Islamic ideology and with British science. Now that's a British euphemism for arms, you know. So by May 1947, the idea of partitioning India, from a position against it, the military had come diametrically in the other direction, and partitioning India became the acceptable way of transferring power. Then we have Mountbatten and the 3 June partition plan, where the partition of India was announced, and it was announced that in the 2 Muslim majority provinces, the assemblies would be, they would vote on whether they wanted to be part of India or wanted to be part of Pakistan. And the procedure was that Bengal and Punjab both were split into 2 blocks. In Punjab, Hindu Sikh majority districts became 1 block and Muslim majority districts the 2nd block. In Bengal, the Hindu majority districts became 1 block and the Muslim majority district became another block. If either block in the 2 provinces voted for partition, then those provinces would also be partitioned. And on the 21st of June, Bengal voted for partition, and on the 33rd of June, Punjab voted for partition. Now, this is how the whole setup is. Jinnah wanted India to be partitioned on the basis of religion, so that those areas in which Muslims were in a majority are separated to create Muslim states, later on 1 state. And this was counted first by the Sikhs and then by the Hindu Mahasabha. So these 2 provinces also went through a partition.
Please mute whoever is there. Professor, please continue.
Please mute.
The professor is muted.
Professor Ahmed is muted, I think so.
How come I was muted anyhow?
So please unmute yourself.
ठीक है जी. So I was saying that the decision to partition India in the 3 June plan also contained the partition possibilities of Bengal and Punjab Assembly. I hope people heard when I described the procedure, how the 2 assemblies voted, or do I need to repeat it? I just wonder.
No, it was clear.
We heard, yeah.
Yeah.
It was,
But-
sir. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Now, if we were to move away from the ideology and the reasoning and look at what was happening in the society, were people behaving normally to this, or the fear and the sense of anxiety, the angst which had been created was leading to extremist reactions? And we know that notoriously, when Jinnah gave the call for direct action on the 29th of June, 1946, on the 16th of August, hell break loose in Calcutta, and in a matter of 3, 4, 5 days, about 10,000 people were killed. Initially, the Muslims attacked the Hindus, but 23% was the percentage of Muslims in Calcutta. In the counter-attack, then the Hindus and Sikhs, actually taxi drivers in large numbers were there. They attacked the Muslims, and maybe more Muslims were killed. We don't know. Counting the dead bodies is always very problematic, but about 10,000 were killed. The British records always play down the numbers. Then this spread to Noakhali. From Noakhali, Gandhiji went there, brought order, we know what happened to him there. Then in Bombay, there were attacks. And this time, the Muslims were at the receiving end. Then in Bihar, there was a massacre, one-sided massacre of Muslims of about 5,000 to 7,000. And it's only, I think, Jawaharlal Nehru, when he arrived and he threatened to bombard the people who were doing this, that law and order was restored. I have, in my Jinnah book, pointed out that during all these communal riots, vicious, merciless, targeting children, targeting women, old people, Jinnah Sahib never ever visited a single refugee camp. Whereas if you look at the Congress leaders, whenever it happened, they were all there, one after the other, to lend a helping hand. So I think Jinnah's argument, once it became a mass movement, its consequences ultimately resulted in the partition, in which at least 1 million Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs were killed, and the biggest migration in history, 14 to 15 million people had to cross the border, largely to save their own lives. So if you look at such a background of the partition, it's not surprising that the long shadow of the partition came to haunt relations between the two countries. And if you give me just I'm greatly weakened after my COVID attack. So I need, yes. So if you look now at India-Pakistan relations, the first thing you notice is the contrasting national identities. The painful and controversial legacy of the births of India and Pakistan as two different nations circumscribed the freedom of the power elites on both sides, determine the core characteristics of national identity. Such a task had to be undertaken in the context of the two target communities, Muslims in India and Hindus in Pakistan. In both countries, bloody attacks on these minorities continued outside Bengal and Punjab for quite some time. It must be said, to the credit of the Indian government and the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, that the Hindu rights attacks on Muslims to drive them into Pakistan were brought under control quickly and effectively. But in Pakistan, despite Jinnah's pleas to protect Hindus and other minorities, the attacks continued unabated until, instead of the 20, I'm not going to talk about East Pakistan, because the Pakistan we now have is West Pakistan, so I confine my remarks to this. Had the Hindus and Sikhs, who, according to the 3 June plan, would be part of Pakistan, stayed on, there would be 21% of the population of West Pakistan, Punjab, Sindh, Northwest frontier, and Bengal and Balochistan. But already by December 1947, all of them had to run for their lives. They were attacked. They were the more prosperous community, lived in better places. and held, they were owners of businesses and so on. And so by December 1947, only 1.6 Hindus were left, Hindus and Sikhs were left in Pakistan. And to this day, the percentage remains at 1.6. In India, about 2% of the 12% who had remained behind, 2% of them migrated to Sindh on the invitation of Jinnah and Liaquat Ali Khan. The rest stayed on in India. And as I have noted, that the Indian government ensured that they could live in peace if they wanted to. I've given these details. The Indian Constitution adopted a secular democratic constitution with equal rights. I think we know. In 1955, Hindu personal law was reformed to grant equal property rights to women, and other progressive steps such as forbidding multiple wives were also introduced. But such reform did not touch Muslim family law. We know how from the 1980s, after the Shah Bano case, that became a big problem for the Congress party, which was accused of Muslim appeasement. Whereas, I've talked to some of these people and said, the idea of an appeasement does not make sense, because the Sacha report came out with the startling conclusion that the Muslims of India, except for this tiny number of upper class Ashrafia Muslims who have always been privileged, the Muslims of India were just above the Dalits, and they were below the other backward castes. So they were squeezed into the lower sections of Indian society. Later on, of course, the Hindu nationalists, after the Shah Bano case, they were emboldened. And then the Ayodhya case started. When the Ayodhya case started, it had repercussions in Pakistan, where I incidentally happened to be in Lahore. And these mad crowds went on a rampage, bringing down any standing Hindu temple, including the Jain Mandir, which was not a Hindu temple, but these brothers, the Sharif brothers, were involved in it. They were leading these attacks. So I think that's when an event in India impacts on Pakistan. But if we were to ask the right wing in India, they would say, look, what about what Pakistan has done to the tiny Hindu minority left in Pakistan? You hear about 1,000 Hindu girls every year being abducted and forcibly converted to Islam and married away to Muslims. So it's like the partition syndrome has percolated politics on both sides. In the case of Pakistan, it was bound to happen. Jinnah making this heroic 11th August speech, Hindus will cease to be Muslims and Muslims will cease to be Muslims, not in a religious sense, but because that is a matter of private faith, but as citizens of the state, for me, is no secular covenant. It's nonsense to argue that. I think Jinnah was told by his advisors that, look, if the Hindus forced 35 million Muslims into Pakistan, West Pakistan, whose population at that time was only 33.9 million, would have twice as many people, and it would crush under the weight of double that amount of people. So better make such a statement and convince the Indian government not to force the Muslims to leave India. And the truth is, the Congress ideology, the commitment of Nehru and Gandhi especially, some people would say even Patel, because he was the home minister, and many others, was not to terrorize Muslims to run from India and come to Pakistan. But that's become a problem now because in India, the idea has been going around that the Muslims, Indian Muslims are a fifth column. And we have then the terrorism, which after the so-called Afghan jihad began to attack targets in the Indian Kashmir, they ultimately ended up attacking even Mumbai and Delhi and these major prestigious points of India, including the Indian Parliament. So in those circumstances, that relations between the two have been so bitter and so much driven by animosity is not surprising. The partition syndrome, the hatred invested in it, that if you don't belong to my religion, then you are my enemy and therefore a legitimate target to be demonized and dehumanized and crushed, seems to be part of the gut reaction of extremists on both sides. I can continue and so on, but I think this would do. Thank you very much, and I would be very happy to respond to any questions that the audience may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, for such an erudite and a very rich historical account of the partition. May I request the chair, Professor Vinod Mubai, to please make his chair's comments.
Thank you, Neha, and thank you, Ishtiaq Bhai, for what I fully expected, a very balanced and fact-filled presentation that cannot be challenged by anybody. It is not based out of some, cloudy ideology. It is based on a recitation of the facts that existed all in the years prior to partition and unfortunately those that have led to it now. So I really thank you for this excellent presentation, which I fully expected, having read most of your writings and us having talked at various times too. So I will now request Neha to read out some of the questions that are in the chat box. And if there are, some people who wish to raise their hand and to ask a particular question, we could do that also. And also I would request Ram to make a few remarks before we start the question and answer session. And Ram, please, if you would like to make a few remarks, please go ahead now.
I think Ram has left.
No.
No, Ram is here.
Ram is very much there.
I was ready, but
Okay.
lecture glued me down to the chair, though I have a next assignment. Of course, if you give me a couple of minutes, I'll make 2-3 comments.
Yes.
And of course, first is, of course, the presentation was too good. And as Vinod has said, I will fully endorse that. 2 points I will like to make. One is that this whole separatist politics of Muslim League on one side, Hindu Mahasabha on the other, it had its social roots, according to me, amongst the landed aristocracy, zamindars and the kings, who actually had come and formed their organizations, initially as United.
We can't hear you. Can't hear you.
You are
Ram, you are
muted.
muted.
Unmute, Ram, please.
Yeah. So I was trying to say that I will like to supplement a very minor thing. This, of course, covers very well in what Professor has said. But the class base of these separatist forces lay in the feudal classes. And later on, because of communalization, some middle sections and elite sections also joined the separatists, which you have very well elaborated in your talk. So that is one point which I always want to know. And second, I want to compliment you for telling us that when Nehru became the president of Congress, and he said that this cabinet mission plan, we may not fully go by that. And in that, what was the role of Jinnah? That I think you can underline a bit more for us. So with that, of course, that is the only thing I have to say. And the details are excellent. And also third thing is that this great Calcutta killings, I don't know why they are called great except the number. In that, the perception here is that only Hindus got killed. Even there was a film called Hey Ram, which is very popular, also showed atrocities only against Hindus. But you have very well pointed out that even Muslims were the victims, and that if can be documented, or you can refer to us those documents of Muslims also getting killed, probably it will help us in balancing the picture here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Punyani. First of all, about the class base of communalism, I totally agree with you. You know, there is so much to talk about that I, on purpose, not on purpose, but just let's say even forgot that in 1936, Jawaharlal Nehru, when he was the president of Congress, he made an announcement that in future India, Zimidari will be abolished. And second, that India will be recast in the framework of the Soviet Union. These are exactly his words. And I would say that alarm bells began ringing not only among the landowning classes, but also the British imperialists, because the British had a pathological hatred of the Russians, which after the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution had become pathological. And the idea that a future India would be recast in the shape of the Soviet Union, I think was too much. And that's when they decided to build the Muslim League and Jinnah. I actually quote Jinnah saying that up until now, it was Mr. Gandhi, Mr. Gandhi, Mr. Gandhi, but now they are laying the red carpet for me. And exactly, Jinnah Sahib went to Punjab and told the land-owning classes, look, your future is all dead unless you join the Muslim League and we keep Nehru and socialism and the Congress at bay. And that's how they made the breakthrough. Hindu right and its support base, was it only the landlords or also the petty bourgeoisie and the lumpen people? You would know better than who all supported them. But the Muslim League support base was solidly the land-owning classes of northwestern Muslim majority provinces. That's definitely true. The second point, I think, was about the Calcutta killings.
Yeah.
If you read my Jinnah book, I do quote the available evidence, which shows also that the Muslims were killed in large numbers. Then I think I quote a British officer confirming that. Okay. The reason was that initially the Muslims had the upper hand. I've actually quoted a report of the General Secretary of the Howrah Muslim League saying that 16th of August, corresponds to the month when the Quran was revealed, when the Prophet won the Battle of Badr. So go out and do jihad. Now, this was a heroic call and so on, but they were only 23% of the population of Calcutta. So in the counterattack, which took about 2-3 days, the Hindus and the Sikhs together had the upper hand, and then Muslims were at the receiving end. And I think this punishment, then the Marwadis, made Bihari workers whose shanty towns had been attacked go to Bihar and kill the Muslims in Bihar. So that was another repercussions of what happened in Calcutta. So all these details are given in my Punjab partition book as well as in the Jinnah book. So there was a third point you made.
Yeah, cabinet mission plan, Nehru backing out from cabinet.
The cabinet mission plan, first of all, Jinnah did not accept it. He rejected it as much as the Congress. The question is, what made him accept it? That's the question. Both initially rejected it because the cabinet mission plan didn't grant Pakistan, and they said, this is unacceptable. I've quoted Jinnah saying that. And the Congress's position, which I totally endorse, was this is no framework for a modern state which lacks a center which can make its will prevail in the union. Everything had been given away to the provinces. So they said, we will go to the Constituent Assembly, but not join this cabinet mission sort of administrative part and make a constitution for India, for the whole of India. Jinnah refused to go to the Constituent Assembly, saying that we will not take part in making a constitution for India unless the three provinces, the three groups are already granted constitutions which give them the right to secede from India. Now, why would any reasonable government accept a framework which, before it comes into operation, has the possibility of it being subverted from within? So I think the Congress leaders reluctantly agreed rejected the cabinet mission plan. But once again, when the interim government was formed, I think this point also needs to be, it was not the end. So the British were still trying to bring the two together, and an interim government was formed. In the interim government, Jinnah once again took up positions that the Congress could not nominate a Muslim. They wanted to nominate Azad, and he wouldn't let them do that. So even that was accepted. An interim government was formed. Then came in I think February 1947, the so-called socialist budget prepared by Nawabzada Liaquat Ali Khan, a big landlord, who was the finance minister. Now it taxed business and industry 20-25% of the profit. And nothing was said about land reforms. At that point, let me underline this. The Congress ministers with Nehru and some leftists, they were willing to accept even such a budget. It's Sardar Patel who put his foot down. No more. Now we part our ways. So if anyone decided that no more chance of keeping India united under the circumstances where Jinnah and the Muslim League were not willing to work together as a cabinet, then we go for partition. So it is Sardar Patel. I think I'm very happy you gave me a chance to brought these things to the front. And this can all be checked, verified from the evidence I give you in my book.
Thank you so much. Pleasure.
Professor, we have a lot of questions which I would like to quickly read out, and maybe you can address them together because we are a little short on time.
Together I can't. One by one, I keep forgetting.
Okay, so I'll read the first question.
Yeah.
First question is from Ehsan Masood to you. He writes, it seems as if the distinction of Muslims and Hindus is challenged and partition is considered as a wrong decision. If this is so, why did Hindi-Urdu controversy begin? Hindi-Sanskrit's implementation across India was to render all Muslims as irrelevant. Was it not the first seed planted to fan fire of communism?
Well, if you look at the 1928 Nehru report, it says Hindustani will be the national language of India with two scripts of equal dignity and official, Devanagari and Urdu Persian. So insofar as the Congress party is concerned, this language question had been taken care of. In 1936, there is a Congress resolution once again saying Hindustani will be the national language of India with two scripts. And Jinnah and the Muslim League then take the position that Hindustani is no language. It's Congress propaganda. And Urdu is the language of Muslims. Now, of course, this was nonsense, because if you look at the great literature produced in Urdu, some of the names are of Hindus, great scholars, Munshi Premchand wrote in it, Krishan Chandar is there. I can name so many people who were writing in Urdu, because Punjabis who went to school were all trained to read and write Urdu, and there was a lot of things going on in Urdu at that time. So who took the position that Urdu is the language of Muslims is the Muslim League leadership. If we go back now, I think this gentleman does have a point, going back to the 1880 Hindi-Urdu controversy. Now, just look at the background. In 1837, when I think the British annexed UP, or even earlier, they continued with Urdu as the official language at the lower level. The Muslim population of UP was only 14%, but about 80% of the jobs were with people who were conversant in these languages, which included, of course, the Muslims, Kashmiri Brahmins, and Kaist Hindus. These were two Hindu castes who also were employed by the state. But the people in general, the intelligentsia in the UP, were trained in the Hindi script, and they wanted some sort of possibility for them to find employment. And when this Hindi-Urdu controversy developed further, then in 1900, the government made both Hindi and Urdu official languages of the UP. So this was settled. Of course, in the beginning, there was this demand, we don't want Urdu, we want Hindi. But it was taken care of already in 1900. And then I've given you 1928 Daru report, and then 1936, the Congress resolution, and the Muslim League response to it, saying that Urdu is the language only of Muslims. So if anybody is to be blamed for what has happened to Urdu in India, is those Muslims who opted for Pakistan, where it is the official language. And we resent that, because Punjabi, I, born a Punjabi, am illiterate in Punjabi. We are not allowed to read and write in Punjabi. There is no newspaper in the whole of Punjab which dominates the army bureaucracy, which runs the whole Pakistan, of a Punjabi newspaper. Not even a Punjabi proper TV channel in this era of social media and so on. That's what has happened to our languages, to Sindhi, to Pashto, and the rest. So Urdu got its hold on Pakistan because of Pakistan. Yeah. So next question.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Professor. The next question is by Dr. Narendra Nagarwal. He says, my question, what was the most crucial turning point that forced Jinnah to form a separate homeland for Muslims? What were the factors and circumstances that led to partition of India? As I believe a secular Jinnah can't be turned into a communal mascot of Muslim community overnight. I think radical Hindu outfits fueled the ongoing fire of communal divide between Hindus and Muslims. Overall, excellent lecture. Many congratulations for such an erudite lecture.
Thank you very much. Well, if you look at my book, there is the first part of Jinnah is solidly secular and Indian nationalist. I think he felt that in the era of mass politics, with Gandhiji bringing the people into the streets, his way of doing politics, that is to make speeches criticizing the British policies on the floor of the Imperial Assembly were over. In the future, it will be mass action which would lead the Indian freedom struggle. And that he resented. But finally, when he had to get Pakistan, he resorted to it after the 16th of August call for direct action. So Jinnah then resorts, but Gandhiji brought, if we can say, religion into politics. He did it by having all religions given equal dignity. At the evening prayers, I have one die-hard Muslim leaguer, Sayyid Ahmed Said Kirmani, a young Lahore person going to Delhi, saying he was moved when Gandhiji had his evening prayers. It started with the recitation from the Quran, then from the Bible, and then from the Gita. So Gandhiji's policies were to bring people together, even through the medium of religion, by emphasizing what is good in them about a shared humanity. Jinnah uses his power and his influence to preach hatred on the basis of. So, I mean, that's how I look at it. And by that time, Jinnah was no longer secular in the secular sense of 1905, 1916, and so on. He had become an advocate of communalism. I told you, he told the governor of Bombay that henceforth he is going to use communalism. And I think there the Congress did make a major mistake, which Indian historians are very sensitive about, and that is, even if there was no gentleman's agreement, let's say in the UP, that both Congress and League would form a coalition government, to insist that people elected on a Muslim League ticket to the UP Assembly must first resign from the Muslim League. And this is, by the way, this was something which Maulana Azad had instructed Nehru to adopt. So the idea came from Azad that these Muslim Leaguers must resign from the Muslim League and join the Congress, and then we will consider them for a ministership. Jinnah at that point then decided to use communalism to counter Congress, and what he felt that the Congress now wanted to finish off the Muslim League. So if they wanted to survive, he had to find all the arguments to oppose that. And the argument was that landlordism will be gone in a united India. Socialism will come. And I think that was enough then to create for him a constituency, first with the British, who started supporting him, and then the landowning classes of northwestern India, where the Muslims were in a majority. Next question.
Professor, this question is by Narendra Mohanty, but I think you have partly answered his question.
Okay.
His question is, what is your opinion about the remarks of L.K. Advani that Jinnah was secular, by which he was sided by his own party and Sangh Parivar? Was that a political stunt or reality?
I think it was a political stunt, because all they wanted to do was to say that, look, Jinnah was secular and he went on to have a Muslim Pakistan. So why can't we be secular and have a Hindu Rashtra? Why should we stick to Nehru's secularism, which separates religion from the state? Simple as that. For me, it makes a lot of sense. You adopt Jinnah as a secular person, but say he created a Muslim Pakistan. So we are secular in a Hindu way. We'll have a Hindu Rashtra, and it will not be the secularism of Nehru. It will be the secularism of Hindus. That's it.
It's a very good response. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's one more question. Actually, this question is also asked by someone else. Cynthia and Virochan both ask you a question, which is that first they congratulate you for shedding light on wonderful unknown facts. But also, what is your opinion about then and now? Do you feel the situations are peaceful after partition, or what is the future ahead for both the countries?
The biggest tragedy is that the partition did not end in 47 in demonizing, dehumanizing the other. It rather became part of Pakistan politics from day one, which is now fast becoming part of the practice of the Indian government. So we are not moving towards any friendlier milieu. It's more like the confrontation is becoming much worse. But I tell you, there is a point at which things will start changing. Pakistan could build up its armed forces and so on by joining military pacts, first with the US, and it got armed, then through China, and in the Iran-Saudi conflict, they got help from the Saudis with money to arm themselves, and employment from Pakistanis in the Middle East. But all those sources are now dried up. The Americans are not funding Pakistan. The Saudis are in no position to do it anymore. They already have many other headaches. There is a war in Yemen and so on going on. And the Chinese remain the only power willing to bail out Pakistan, but even they have serious concerns about Pakistan's constant breakdown of law and order, inability to reproduce stable government, because their investments in CPEC and all are frozen there. I mean, nothing has happened since then. With these things taking place, maybe the survival instinct would convince people in Pakistan that it's now time to bury the hatchet and go forward. And I've argued that the best way to do is to accept the line of control as the international border between India and Pakistan. This is not a very original idea, because it has been in the air for a long time. And actually, India and Pakistan almost agreed to it in 208. And then you have the Musharraf, Mohan Singh parlays and negotiations. And you had the Kasuri plan, which said that there can't be an independent, both India and Pakistan overrule an independent Kashmir. What we can do then is to make the borders porous, build confidence on both sides, start the bus service, let Kashmiris come and meet one another, and we relax the border between India and Pakistan. Unfortunately, that did not take place because Musharraf fell out of power. The subsequent changes went in another direction. Somebody went and did Mumbai. So any chances of such an agreement going further were dashed by the Mumbai terrorist attacks. Vajpayee Sahib came in 1999, Lahore Accord and so on, and then comes Kargil. Somebody once again sabotages it. Even Narendra Modi came to a private wedding of the Sharifs, and then comes Pathankot. So somebody has thus far been able to subvert all these actions, activities. But the problem is Pakistan is now almost bankrupt. Actually, it is bankrupt, but we are too big a country with nuclear weapons and 220 million people for the world to accept it. It will create a sort of disorder which the world won't be able to handle. So I am hopeful that in the future, a change in Pakistani orientation towards India can take place. And I think the Indians keep on saying that we want the Kashmir, which is with Pakistan. They would agree to that you keep your Kashmir, we keep our Kashmir. And so let's go forward. Now, this is the only dream I have. And I can't give you another version, but I think it's a realistic thing. It can happen. After all, 2 world wars and many other intercontinental wars were fought by French and German and British and so on. And then finally, the European Union did happen in that part of the world where the greatest concentration of bloodshed has taken place in history. So if it can happen there, why can't it happen in our part of the world where we have so many traditions of cooperation and so on? In Pakistan now, people are recognizing, and I'm one of them, not the only one, who keeps saying that the greatest benefactor of Lahore has been a Hindu, Sir Gangaram. But then that's not the only name. You have Lala Melaram, you have Rai Bahadur Saran, Ram Saran Das, grandfather of Karan Thapad. Their favors to Lahore are all there for people to see. So I think intellectuals have the duty to keep on pointing out what we share, and we definitely share a lot. Somebody was telling me that the first translation of the Quran into Urdu was done by some Hindu scholar. Now, I have not gone and checked it, but this could be true. So things like this have happened in the past. We have had ideas of Hussaini Brahmins, a sect of Brahmins of Punjab claiming that their ancestors fought on the site of Imam Hussain. Whether that is a legend or it's true, we don't know. But I mean, ideas to bring these people together have existed all along. And if you have read Waris Shah's Heer, at one point, when Ranja is fed up with the world, what does he do? He joins the Gorakhnathi Yogis, a Hindu sect, and is accepted. So these things are part of our checkered, history. History is always selectively remembered and narrated. And I think we have a duty to tell this part of the history which is hidden from the people. That's the way I look at it.
Professor, before we continue with questions, which there are many,
Okay.
I would like to read some congratulatory messages. Indra Munshi says, thank you for giving us new facts and new insights into the partition story. We also have Father Anand Matthew saying, thanks a lot, Professor Ishtiaq, for this excellent lecture. Then we have Prabha Pandey, who makes a very fine point, saying that this lecture should be included in school and university curriculums to clear the fog of suspicion, fear, and hate, which still covers blinds of our reasoning on the subject, extremely relevant. And of course, there are demands that we circulate the written lecture. So that is one. But we can proceed to the next question, which is, sir, what would you, this is by Sandoz Basharat, who says, sir, what could be the other way around for Jinnah if not going for a separate land for Muslims?
Well, I don't know. He was hell-bent on having India partition. I actually dismiss all ideas that he was seeking a power-sharing deal. I've shown that this is the biggest fraud in academia which has gone on for all these years. There is not even one speech in which Jinnah remotely says, we want anything but Pakistan. And I've said cabinet mission plan, maybe I should bring this fact also. On the 4th of April, when the cabinet delegation met Jinnah, they said, Mr. Jinnah, unless you can show us that East and West Pakistan can be one defensive state, you leave us, cannot be challenged. But there are people who do that. And the thing is, in India, this was challenged by many people. But I think it had to be a Pakistani to come up and do it in a big way. And finally, in Pakistan, the mainstream historians reject her thesis out of hand. For them, Jinnah is the Marde Momin, the great Muslim, Marde Kamil, the man of action, who single-handedly got Pakistan in the face of opposition from giants like Gandhi, Nehru, Azad, Patel. This is how they tell the story. So Aisha Jalal is popular only with this half-read, half-informed leftists who don't go and check the facts to see if it makes sense at all. It's a scandal to keep on talking about her thesis.
Okay. We have actually a relevant comment to what you just said. This is by Tanushri Gangopadhyay, who says that Jinnah was hardly purely Islamic. He had married a Parsi. He also couldn't do without his evening alcoholic drink. So this was one of the
But
comments.
who says that a Muslim must be pious also? Or is every Hindu a pious Hindu, by the way? I mean, this is a very strange way of putting Jinnah.
Savarkar is an atheist.
Yeah, Savarkar was an atheist. So how do you explain his Hindutva? I mean, people, and by the way, Hitler was a vegetarian who used to relax by leaving human beings and going to all the goats and sheep and cows very relaxed. Would you say that he was a very peace-loving human being? These are childish things to say.
Yeah. There is also actually a couple of questions relating to Kashmir.
Okay.
And some of them are, if there would have been no partition, was it possible not to have conflicts in Kashmir, what we face today? Also, sir, why accepting LOC? Why not having a plebiscite and deciding accordingly? And
Okay.
your take on the Kashmir Files film that was made in India?
The Kashmir Files I have not seen, so I would rather not make a comment. But from what I've heard, it only shows the suffering of the Kashmiri Pandits, which is of course true. But some people tell me that 3 times more Muslims who were also opposed to this extremist sort of were killed as well. But this film is silent on that. And that puts the film in a different category. But since I've not seen it, I would not like to comment on it. If there was no partition of India, there would be no partition of, no conflict about the princely states either. You see, even among the British, while the majority at the end under American pressure agreed to the partition, there was a very strong lobby headed by Sir Conrad Cornfield, who wanted the princely states to remain independent. And maybe they would have remained independent for some time until a new sort of political awareness emerged and a peaceful integration of them could take place. What happened because of the partition is that in some cases, this was done through the use of force. For example, in Hyderabad, it was used. In Kashmir, it was used. But the precedent was established by Jinnah by accepting Junagadh, which was so far away from the border with Pakistan. And 89% or 90% of the population was Hindu, which wanted to join India. So once again, and by the way, on the 1st of November, 1947, Mountbatten came to Lahore, where he offered that a plebiscite could be held. Now, the plebiscite question can be held in Junagadh, Kashmir, and Hyderabad. And Jinnah did not show any interest. So who rejected the idea of a plebiscite at that point? Jinnah Sahib did it. He was hoping to get Kashmir because of the military action which he had ordered, which didn't succeed. It almost succeeded, except at Baramulla, these people started looting more than fighting for whatever they were aiming at the liberation of Kashmir. And Indian intervention then put a stop to it. So the plebiscite, and one thing more, suppose a plebiscite is held, it would mean that Pakistan's territory would reduce from what it is today to all the way down into the border between Jhelum and Gujarat district. Now, who wants a Pakistan further reduced in size? Nobody does it. So Pakistan doesn't want a plebiscite either. It keeps on demanding it, but we know that that's not possible. And then India has its own position why they think that the plebiscite is outdated. I would say, why plebiscite? Why not actually relax the border on Kashmir? And I would say, why not even relax the border in Punjab and make this area a region of peace and prosperity according to the SARC charter? Let there be an India, and let there be a Pakistan, and let there be an Indian Kashmir and an Indian and a Pakistan Kashmir, and still we can all draw benefit from these formal divisions, markings of borders. Why can't we use our intelligence and for once be creative and innovative? I don't think plebiscite was possible at all, because it will still be about a Hindu voting one way and a Muslim voting another way, which is going back to the two-nation theory. And I think that's a dreadful idea. What will happen to the Muslims in India? They would be held responsible first for the partition of India and second, the loss of Kashmir. So no more of it. I'm not for it.
Thank you. There is a question which is by Shabana asking you, are the Hindus in Pakistan ill-treated by Muslims? And a sort of related question is by Mukesh Agarwal, who writes, I feel sad for the common man of Pakistan. A failed state of Pakistan cannot be good for anyone, but how to change the political culture of Pakistan?
The second question is an impossible to give an answer to, except, as I've said, the objective conditions are no longer conducive for the old type of Pakistan to continue. That is to arm itself, to keep on having confrontation with India, with terrorism going on. Of course, the Pakistanis say that there is an Indian hand in Balochistan. I say both hands should be cut off. You keep yours, we keep ours. That's the only way forward. So what was the first part of this question? You know, there were two.
The question was, are the Hindus in Pakistan ill-treated by Muslims?
Well, it depends. I have met many Hindus, Indian Hindus, who have come to Pakistan, at least Lahore, I know for a fact, who the chabdi wala, you know, the rickshaw driver, the shopkeeper, they all say, Pan ji, bhai ji, tusi aa gaye ho, tusi sade mehman ho. We will not even charge you. These are poor people wanting to extend their hospitality. So insofar as the common person is concerned, this hatred is no strongly ingrained. But you know, when it's a mob and you can go and attack, things can change in a dramatic manner. You can see mob behavior is very different from individual behavior. So mostly people coming from India get royal treatment in Lahore. I have not met a single Hindu or Sikh saying that the people locally ill-treated them. But politically and, you know, so many other state-oriented things happen. So they are the ones who are the spoilers. And with Pakistan on its knees now because of the economic, difficulties it is in, I think people would look for some normalizations with India. And I think Bajwa even wanted to do that, but then Imran Khan, in his madness, overruled it. So if in the army there is some understanding we can't afford a confrontation with India, then I think the first step towards normalization, if we want to call it, already exists objectively. All we need is the politicians to act responsibly. When will that happen? Will that happen? I can't say.
Okay. So we have a last question actually.
Okay.
So what are your views for creation of a nuclear-free zone in South Asia? Would it lead to sustainable peace?
When the nuclear explosions took place, I remember Vinod and Parvez Hoodboy, and there was a gentleman, Mia something, I forget his name now. So many people came out.
Zia Mia.
Yeah. Decent people who understood the consequences of a nuclear exchange between India and Pakistan. But the counter argument is that ever since the nuclear weapons are there on both sides, a full-scale war is out of the question. So in some weird way, a war between India and Pakistan is not possible unless they resort to nuclear weapons. And since this is suicidal on both sides, they won't do it. But I would say that accidental use of such weapons can take place, and rogue elements can also use such weapons. So if this region is without nuclear weapons, and those are then backed by some sort of European Union or ASEAN type of framework, which SAARC already potentially provides, then I think both sides may be convinced to give up these weapons. But that's a question for the future. So many other things will have to happen before such weapons are given up.
Yep. I think there is one comment. Subrata Das, his hand was up for quite some time, but I couldn't unmute because we had so many questions. But his comment is, in the book Untold Story of India's Partition, Narendra Singh Sarila, pages 239 to 40 say the same thing as you say, that British was afraid of the Bolshevism in India. That British Chief of Staff said that if India became dominated by Russia, British would lose control. It was a very nice lecture. Yes.
Yeah, but I've used Sarila as one of my major sources for building my research. So great respect for that gentleman. I actually met him, so his work was a pioneering work in this field, and we others have followed up. I have done it in great detail because I have all the 12 volumes of the Transfer of Power. I spent a small fortune getting them, but the dividends have been great for me since then. I could not have challenged Aisha Jalal without these Transfer of Power volumes with me. And of course, Jenna's hundreds and thousands of speeches, which I also have with me. Thank you very much. If that is the end of it, then...
There are some questions coming, but I think we have...
go ahead. I'm in a mood to respond. If you want, we can continue. Yeah.
Okay. Actually, there are also some trivia, which is quite interesting. It would be interesting to you too. Shubha Pratim writes that the first Bengali version of Quran was translated by Girish Chandra Sen.
Okay, good. So in Urdu by a Hindu Brahmin, I was told was done, and now into Bengali by a Bengali Hindu. So what does it prove? It at least proves that among Hindus, there is a very large heart somewhere. It's not just the caste system that we keep on attacking all the time. It has a large heart which needs to be properly respected, I think. And even among Muslims, there was Ustad Daman, the people's poet, who was very charmed by the Hindu religion and so on. And I and many others used to go and sit in